So in fact, I'm actually going to be talking about Powys, so I've tailored this presentation really for where we are in Wales, because obviously I do quite a lot of talks about early mining, but I'm certainly going to introduce some of the work I've done in Ceredigion, because it's a good way to understand what might be there in Powys, but we're only just seeing the tip of. So this in fact is this really dramatic picture here is actually one of the sites I'll be talking about, Nanerth mine and the upper reaches of the River Severn, Nanerth Snowbrook mine. So this map of Wales shows with the borders of the area of Powys, shows the 7 sites here which I'll be talking about, ranging from the early Bronze Age, so this the end of the 3rd millennium, beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, right up to the Roman and early medieval period. And so we're pretty well represented. Things have really changed, I think, over the last 20 years, is that we're beginning, these sites are beginning to turn up, or we're beginning to recognize, we're beginning to date them, and beginning to investigate them more. So this, I'm sorry about this rather glary colored geological map here from the BGS, but it's a simplified one, and it just shows the geological setting of those areas I showed on the previous map, where some of the sites we've been investigating. So we're obviously in the central Wales ore field and the Plynlimmon area, these upper Ordovician, lower Silurian shells and gritstones, and these sort of southwest, northeast trending fractures, mineral veins. Also the small area in the Berwyn Mountains in the Ordovician volcanics there, and this other area right on the border between Wales and England at Llanymynech, on this Carboniferous limestone ridge, these outcrops which follow Offa's Dyke. Offa's Dyke follows them, I should say. Okay, so I'm going to start trying to give a little introduction about Bronze Age mines. Obviously, I imagine I have talked to some of you before about this subject. This is just a reconstruction of the early working on Copper Hill in Ceredigion and the end of the Cymyswyd Valley. But I think it's useful to drill a little bit into this, just to give you an idea of the period and what's happening over the British Isles in terms of prospection at the very beginning of those metalworking periods, and how important Wales is to the whole story. Okay, so this map here of Britain Island really shows these areas, and we can see over in the Southwest Island, Ross Island mines and Mount Gabriel mines. Ross Island was working in 2400 BC, so this is in 3rd millennium BC, and it's associated with the Beacon mining camp. So there's a good sort of cultural association, a clue as to the people who are connected with this prospection, which became really widespread across Britain. But what I'm obviously going to draw your attention to now is the mainland Britain, and those 3 areas. So we have the central Wales area, which obviously I'm talking about in Powys, and the North Wales coast, which is the Mynydd Paris Mountain, and very famous Great Orme mine, which was working in the Middle Bronze Age, from the early to Middle Bronze Age, and also another group which you might be less well aware of, which is this Central England Southern Pennine group, which are these copper deposits, again in the Carboniferous limestone, rather like the Great Orme, at Ecton, and also in the Triassic sandstones at Alderley Edge. But in the lower picture here, you can see these 15 early Bronze Age mines which have been identified, excavated and dated now within the Central Wales ore field. And this is the largest group in the British Isles. And so it really is significant. And of course, there's 3 mines we've identified in Powys. So these are small-scale mining, but also prospection sites, I would say. Some of them are very small. work between 2200 period 2200 to 1600 BC. And then, of course, we have the main mining period on the Great Orme, which during the Acton Park metalwork period, and you may be aware of Alan Williams' new book that's just been published, which describes that in a lot of details, a very good piece of research. This Acton Park metalwork period, which the copper from there supplied copper for these Middle Bronze Age pale staves. But returning to Mid Wales, you can see there this group along the Ceredigion coast, inland on the west side of the Cambrian Mountains, and a few sites on the east side in Powys. This is we now have more than 100 radiocarbon dates for the mines in Britain, and Peter Marshall has carried out Bayesian analysis, been modeling the dates, and so there's something rather useful we can say about them. So mining most probably started during the last quarter of the 3rd millennium BC in Mid Wales, and there's an 80% probability of that. We're always dealing with probabilities, of course, when we try to analyze large amounts of radiocarbon data. British mines, they seem to fall into 3 distinct groups: Mid Wales, North Wales, and Northwest Central England. And the model shows a likely order for the start of mining activity in these 3 areas, starting with Mid Wales, then going to the North Wales coast, then to Northwest Central England. Now, this is actually really quite interesting because the earliest dated mines that we have in West Central Wales are actually in the coastal strip. And I think there's this sort of matches a sort of pattern and a model we're suggesting that mining, the prospection move was from Ireland into the west of Britain, and then it moved further eastwards. And this makes perfect sense now with the dating that we're getting for all of these sites. So I want to give you, as I said, I want to give you this, drill down a bit deeper into this one really good example of an excavated upland early Bronze Age mine in Wales, which is the Comet Lode open cast Copper Hill in Cymyswith. It's about 25 kilometers inland of Aberystwyth along the Ystwyth Valley, towards the head of the valley on the western side of the Cambrian Mountains. So this is about sort of 420 meters above sea level. So it's within the Welsh uplands. We carried out archaeological excavations here between 1989 and 1999, and it was quite a detailed and may I say back-breaking work. That all of this, everything we did had to be done. Everything had to be taken up the hill, and logistically it was a big exercise. I'm just going to run through a few pictures to give you the idea of what some of these Bronze Age mines, when they're excavated, look like. So this is a mine gallery that's been worked with stone tools. This beautifully carved roof here and fire setting. This is in the Comet Lode open cast. This is about 2 meters below ground. These pictures on the left-hand side, you get an idea of the logistics of excavating these sites. This is we were digging down to 8 meters below ground level, and step sections and using shoring. But I think the amazing thing here is that this is a pristine site. It's completely sealed by effectively more than 3,500 years of natural sedimentation infilling the original working. So it's a beautiful site, not only for the archaeology, buried archaeology, but for the paleoenvironmental record of following its abandonment. On the right hand side, we see this rock cut entrance here. This is one of the most interesting areas of the mine, and it's turned up lots of artifacts within the working area. They were mining here, but they were also processing ores within the front half of the mine. Lots and lots of organic materials were coming out from these waterlogged sediments. This is an example of, for example, this is a a fragment of a creel-type basket, which is reconstructed there. It'd obviously been damaged, it'd been thrown down. As it was a damaged item, it'd been thrown into the nearest fire set. You must remember these mines are worked using fire to break up the rock, and then using stone tools and antler tools to excavate the rock out and expose the mineral veins. Here we have sort of like rope. We have lots of rope and ties for tying things up, all made of hazel corylus withes. This is an antler pick made of a red deer antler. We found a number of these and lots of smaller fragments, and they're very heavily used. They're quite unlike the sort of antler picks you find in sort of henge monuments in chalk landscapes where they look almost pristine. Here, when you're working against really hard quartz veined rocks, they wear down really quickly, and you can see the tine, which is the pick end, has worn down completely, and then it's been turned around on the crown and used as a hammer. So, you know, this tool has become defunct, but then it's been used as a tool in a different way. These are very well preserved and copper stained, a lot of the bone and antler tools. This is a fragment of a withy handle, one of these hammerstones. So you can see the reconstructions. We've done a lot of experimental work with these, working out how they were used on underarm against the fire set rock. This was found in the mine, and we also found the other half of the same. It had broken, and they just dropped it straight in front of this and walked straight over it and made another one. And so you're walking across these debris layers that left by the miners. By far the most important find was this Alderwood launder. In fact, this is half of it still in situ. It was a 5 meter long, straight, hollowed out gutter for carrying water over the working floors of the mine, and the back, it was still actually in position, supported on stone supports and brushwood, and the angle to take the water away from where it was seeping in at spring heads within the mine. So drainage was obviously an important thing here. What was really nice about it, we've got all the working marks of the use of metal axes, flat axes and wooden wedges on the side. This is now in the National Museum of Wales, along with all the other finds from this site. This is just a reconstruction of a whole series. We found a whole series of wooden launders. That was the best wooden launder. A lot of the others were quite poorly preserved, but it's clearly these were part of a system of wooden launders for managing water within the mine, presumably from draining it. But we think also using in the entrance area for washing the ore and for separating, doing a small amount of gravity separation of some of the minerals. Okay, so let's look at some of the Bronze Age mines in Powys, just on the other side of the Cambrian Mountain watershed. In fact, I'm going to start first of all with a mine very close to the Dyfi estuary, which is number 1, which is Park Lodge mine, copper mine at Machynlleth. So Park Lodge mine was also known traditionally as Ogof Withen. And this is really quite interesting, because I think the point I would like to make here is that many of these features on the landscape were known about for hundreds of years, presumably, but not recognized as mines. There was no concept, they come from a period where there was actually no mining in these areas. And so they're often got names like, holes, or in this case, as a cave, Ogof Withen, which I believe is a mutation, but it probably means cave of the wizard. And there's a legend, of course, about it. Ogof Withen was haunted by ghosts, hobgoblins, and fairies who played occasional pranks on old crones and timid maids. So it's quite a romantic sort of thing. Even in the 19th century, this tradition persists. But in 1869, this was rediscovered by a local miner, and was even then referred to as an ancient Roman working when they found examples of stone tools and some later tools as well. In 1972, Morris thought this was a medieval mine, I think because within a lot of these sites, as we'll see also at Nanerth, as well as the stone tools, they found in the complete infill of this feature some iron tools as well, which is exactly what you know, because this is effectively a sink, and there's always people coming back, and so the upper layers have got later tools in, but not a lot of them, because most of the later work was very small scale, medieval or early post-medieval. So this, you know, we were coming to this site for a number of years when we were surveying mines in central Wales, and we were obviously aware of Ogof Wyddon, and we were always intrigued by it, but frustrated at the same time because we couldn't find any examples of the stone tools that have been talked about in the antiquarian reports. And I think basically there was so much hill wash covering the early tips that absolutely nothing was visible. But in 1996, I was contacted by John Mason, who's a well-known geologist in the area who visits a lot of the mines doing his work. And he said there's a badger's set that has just turned up on the edge of the small open cast there, and right in the middle of the spoil of the badger set is a stone tool. He was absolutely right, and there it was, and that was the beginning of our work. And so, you know, in 1997 we carried our load of test pitting and some trenching all the way around to find where the early spoil tips were, and got stone tools and charcoal from fire setting for radiocarbon dating. And this is written up in AW 37. In fact, there's the radiocarbon date there. So this is very much, it fits into that that range of early Bronze Age activity that I already mentioned. You know, very typical dates on for about 1900 to about, you know, mid 1600 Cal BC, and we have a number of other dates from there as well. So the hammerstones, this is perhaps a good example of some of the hammerstones that are coming out of these Powys and Ceredigion mines, of course. But in this case, there's some really nice examples. You can see the one on the left there. It hasn't actually been grooved, but it's been notched alternately from one side and then from the other side to take a withy, a handle around it. And the flat broken cobble has been used as a mortar. So these are very utilitarian tools that are just picked up and reused, and then picked up again, thrown down, then picked up again and used for something else. What was really interesting, I think, about Ogof Wyddon or Park Lodge mine is that John Mason was convinced, and he could show, that the hammerstones were beach cobbles, but not only had they been brought from the coast, but they'd been brought very specifically from one place because of them, the numbers of Caderidris volcanics and dolerites that were within the assemblage. And he said that the nearest place and the likely place was from the mouth of the Avon de Sunny, near Tovanai, which is just north of Tywyn. So that was really quite interesting to make these links, you know, in terms of their resources, where they were bringing the stone tools from. They just seemed like cobbles, but they knew they needed really good cobbles. And so they were going specifically to try to get these volcanics. So having mentioned the cobblestones, the mining tools, there have been cobblestones collected from the coast, I'd just like to sort of draw your attention to this sort of map we've done of some of the Central Wales Orefield Bronze Age mines. So these all early Bronze Age mining sites, and just to show that west of the Cambrian Mountain watershed, at least 70% of the stone tools that we find at the mines have all been brought from the coast, often up the river valley, like at Cwmystwyth. They're all, 70% of them probably seem to be beach cobbles, so they've been brought inland by the miners. but east of that Cambrian Mountain Divide. And that's seems to be a geographic sort of barrier that the cobbles they're using for stone mining tours are either collected from the rivers or from the glacial till, or rarely they're also quarried from the actual hard rock outcrops. So it's a real sort of distinction between these two different areas, one in Ceredigion and one in Powys on the other side of the Cambrian Mountain Divide. I also like to point out these prospection areas, which we think is connected to the original woodland clearance for pasturage during the Bronze Age, and consequent erosion on the valley sides, revealing mineral veins. So pastoralism and prospection are probably intimately linked together. This is what I think. So moving onto the slopes of Plinlimmon, sorry, is the Nanerth and Snowbrook mine. I mean, this is, again, you can see the more detail here, this dramatic picture of this gorge. I think what we're looking at here is not just the Bronze Age mine, although we think this is the extent of the Bronze Age mine laterally, but it's been deepened by medieval and post-medieval working. But what we have got preserved is remains of the Bronze Age spoil and hammerstones on the bank, or on the banks of this big open cast working. So the mine was rediscovered in 1858 by Captain Reynolds, and he gives the dimensions of it, which are much less the dimensions we have today. But he only records 33 tons of lead ore, so there was no sign of copper ore then. And in fact, there was very little sign of any ore. It was basically an emptied mine. But what he did find were stag's horn, which is obviously an antler pick, and a stone ball and an iron pick, which are in the Duke of Northumberland's museum and Alnwick Castle. Oliver Davies came here in 1938 as part of the British Association investigation of early mines and recovered charcoal and stone tools. So hard on his heels, a bit of a time gap here, but we came to reinvestigate Oliver Davies' work in 1988. And it was a summer to remember. It was a very successful summer, but all the odds were against it. We were working for a week in continual rain, and when it wasn't raining, it was we were just working in clouds of midges, and then there was horseflies, and it was basically it was a sort of terrifying ordeal, but we did in fact find what we were after at the end of it, despite of it. And you can see the example of this section cut through one of the tips that Oliver Davies describes, and you can even see from here the amount of dark, the presence of charcoal throughout there, because the rock is so hard of the upper Ordovician sandstones there. It required an awful lot of fire setting, so the use of fuel in this mine must have been enormous, and hence one imagines that the results were worth it. Presumably oxidized copper minerals in the upper part of this copper-lead lode. We 30 years later, remembering our trials in that summer of 1988, we thought we'd better come back and revisit this and carry out some more work to really sort of support some of our original ideas. And what was very useful about this, that we basically sampled all the way along the exposed outcrop, and for more than 100 meters we were finding Bronze Age spoil. It was quite an incredible. We only at that point realized how extensive those prehistoric workings were. They weren't going down, but they were going laterally all the way along the lodes. So it was a significant mine. And it's interesting we talk about the mines at Copper Hill at Cwmystwyth, producing maybe between 10 and up to 20 tons of copper metal. It's very much an estimate. But, Nantir Era may well fit into this sort of model of a medium to large size mine. The other very interesting thing, as I sort of alluded to already, is that we found evidence for hammerstones being quarried from the outcrop, these hard sandstones. So they're using the same rock to mine the lode country rock, but bearing in mind they have to very heavily fire it because they don't have anything tougher than the sandstone from the rock on either side of the lode in which to break the rock up. So that's probably the reason why there had to be so intensively fired, this rock, to get to mine. Now, this is a story here of a lost mine. So Nantyricket mine on the River Severn, which is, if any of you know, in the very headwaters of the River Severn by the Severn Breakits Net waterfall. Just a little way down from that is the site of Nantyricket copper mine, which O.T. Jones refers to in 1921 in his memoir. And what's quite interesting, it's also referred to a hammer in a parochial account of the area of Llandudloes. He also refers to Nantyricket or Cymricket. But as O.T. Jones pointed out, the name is really interesting because there's an old open cut there. So in 1988, we found this mine, but we didn't survey it. And we found the open cut working, which we believe was Lochus Ladron, or Thieves' Den. And of course, this again alludes to exactly the same thing I was saying about Ogof Witham, is that this was a feature in the landscape which was at the time not recognized as being a mine simply because it was so ancient. But it was on a copper lode. So we came back here in 2012, desperate, to try to find it. And in fact, it took 2 years to find this mine. And what had actually happened is there'd been a large-scale forestry operation, and they'd filled in the open cast and destroyed the tip that O.T. Jones talks about. But what we did find was the location of this tip down by the River Severn and the base of the tip and some datable material. So this is a plan of the Nantyricket mine. So you can see how close to the River Severn this is. So some of the original prehistoric workings have probably since been washed away by the river. The Loch Ladron open cast no longer exists. It's been filled in by and a forestry road covers it. The interesting thing is, from finding datable material, is that it's too early. But I think what we have here is the actual ground surface immediately beneath where we know there was a Bronze Age mine tip with hammerstones. And so I think what we're dealing with is possibly there's some other settlement activity there, or alternative explanation is that there was original extraction here early, perhaps even for pigment, bearing in mind the copper minerals and secondary copper minerals that would have been present there. We really don't know, so the jury's out on that. But it's interesting, this is all one early date, which is out of kilter in a sense with that very precise range that we have from all the other sites. Now, I'm just going to briefly it's useful to sort of just ponder for a moment on the model for prospection and mining during the Bronze Age in these upland sites in central Wales. So, what we propose is that, people were moving from these coastal, pastoral people were involved in mining and prospecting, and they were moving from the coastal winter pastures, taking animals, moving them in late spring or summer along the river valley ridge routes up into the uplands, and where there was summer pasturage, and there would be small-scale woodland clearance. And this small-scale woodland clearance type swithin type agriculture on the valley sides would have led to erosion, increased erosion, which might well have exposed mineral veins. And it's that exposure of mineral veins being noticed by the people who are actually occupying the areas, the pastoralists, is that, you know, that's the information they're bringing back first of all, and with samples, and showing to perhaps to itinerant metal workers of the minerals they found, of the knowledge exchange. And that knowledge exchange is affirmative, it's positive. So they go back seeing that this is a valuable, you know, pastime to cohabit with pastoral activities, and so they became pastoralist miners. And we see this, you know, the same sort of model, animals moving in the late spring or summer, they're taking up hammerstones into the mountains, seasonally clearing for tree, you know, for wood, for as well as for the animals, but also wood for fuel, for fire setting and mining, processing of the ore at valley campsites, and carrying the ore back with them in the autumn months, meeting with metal workers, and the metal workers then smelt. And perhaps rather than the miners smelting, the metal workers are exchanging ore for finished metal products, which are useful to the pastoralists. So, in relation to these two Plynlimmon mines in Powys, Nanterara and Nantericket, we wanted to do some coring in the uplands, and this is in the area around Plynlimmon. And so we cored near the source of the River Severn with as part of the Metal Links project with my colleague Tim Mayle, who's a palynologist. So we wanted to look. We recovered a 2.5 meter core from this ombrotrophic, which is a rain-fed peat bog right at the source of the Severn, and we had use of a core scanner, XRF core scanner at Aberystwyth in the Department of Earth Sciences. And although I mean I tend to look at this and think it's not over. I don't really know how significant it is, but what's really interesting, if we look at that, the trace for silicon from this from this peat profile, we see there's very little clastic material coming in. So there's not material being washed into the bog. It's only a rain-fed bog, and any heavy metals are coming in are liable to be coming in from the atmosphere. So that's a good thing. What we can see is there are some peaks, both in the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Roman period, and also in the very early medieval period for copper. They're not, in terms of amplitude, they're not so convincing, but at least they're there, and they may well relate to some small scale. It is actually picking up some traces of prospecting and mining in those upland areas. What's really significant, though, is we have no lead during the early period, but suddenly lead are turning up in the early medieval periods, which is very distinctive at the top of the lead trace. So, you know, in a sense, but not copper. So it looks like the interest was in copper early, and then quite a lot of lead coming out from the mines from the medieval period onwards. Okay, so let's look at Iron Age mining. So there's one site here, and this is the site of Llanymynech, which I mentioned over on the Carboniferous limestone on the Welsh borders, just into Powys. So this is we went there in 2021 we got scheduled monument consent to survey and excavate underground. I think this picture gives you an idea of the sort of interior of this working. In fact, Llanymynech is you know, Llanymynech Cave, but it's always been referred to as a mine. Well, in fact, it is in fact partly a cave, and this is the one sort of revelation that we made, which I don't know why, but I don't think this had been picked up on so much before. We're actually looking into a sort of karstic tube up into the limestone here from the mine workings. So there's definitely karst everywhere within this system, but we know it's also a mine because there's mineralization. So this is looking out from the front entrance of the Ogof. So this large natural amphitheatre in front of you, which is now the Clwyd-Powys golf course, but you get the feeling, in fact, what we're looking at is the interior of what is the largest Iron Age hill fort in Wales, Clwyd-Powys, and effectively the earthworks follow the natural topography around this large amphitheatre. On the west side, we also have Offa's Dyke. So on the highest, they've used the highest part of this limestone ridge to erect the dike in the very early medieval period. One other thing I would say about this picture is that in the center of this natural depression is a peat mire, which has now been, of course, drained for the golf course. But Jenny Moore in the early 1970s took a peat core from here, radiocarbon dated peat core, and got really interesting suggestions of peaks of copper and lead from the late Bronze Age and the Iron Age period within the peat profile. So this is trace metals within the peat. This is the entrance to the Ogof here. So this is a collapsed into a part of a chamber within the cave or mine, and it's also been quarried for stone at the front, so it's been considerably modified. But you can see these small little passages going off on the top left-hand side. Now, the Clwyd-Powys is a very interesting place, I think, because it's like so many of these other mines which are named, referred to as caves. It's had a very long history of visitors, and it's easy to access, and it became something of a place to visit during the Victorian period. If ever you came to Llanymynech, to come and visit the Roman mine, and long before that as well. So the Edward Clwyd visit here talked about the mine and the cave in 1694. Walter Machen visited in 1795. Pennant refers to it as a Roman mine at the end of the 18th century. And you see, there's some nice romantic descriptions of visitor descriptions of going underground here in the 19th century. And so many legends as well. I mean, there's a wonderful legend of a blind harpist who disappeared one day down the mine, and he never reappeared, but he could be heard during Sunday service in the local church playing his harp deep underground. But there's reams of information. And of course, CPAT have done a very good desktop survey of the mine, of the hill fort. And CPAT also worked when metal detectors found human remains. The human remains turned out to be modern, but there are many other human remains here. So what's important is human remains have been found for more than 200 years inside the mine. And today you can still see, if you go underground, you can see animal bone and human bone everywhere scattered. In a way, it's a real bit of a mess underground, because it's been so heavily visited by cavers and dug into in different places. So this is a sort of caver's map of the workings, and there's many records of finds of Roman coins, of whetstones, bone pins. In 1965, 35 silver denarii. So basically, this place has been a depository of finds over the period, with being an awful lot of Roman finds ending up in the mine. I think I'll just point out that some of the passages are very clearly similar to the Great Orme. They're sort of low bedding plains, some with sort of small karstic cavities going off them. And at the very end of the mine, there's a quite different character to it in the Belfry series, i.e. there's a different phase of mining with these square trapezoidal pit-cut passages. So this is we basically is in 2021 we had permission to cut a couple of trenches underground. In fact, we cut sections through this speleothem, this stalagmite covered walls and mining beds underground in 3 locations within the entrance series here, and recovered charcoal from beneath stalagmite. And then in the mandible chamber, which is just close to a blocked entrance to the whole system, we found a stream passage. And in the base of the stream passage, this was sediment filled, but with mining beds buried underneath. And it appears that people had come through the stream passage, but they'd been mining off the walls where copper mineralization was in the dolomite there. So this in fact is a date from this site D within the mandible chamber within the edge of the stream passage where there's been copper mining, which dates from the middle to the late Iron Age. So this is quite a revelation, but of course not surprising when you think that this site is bang within the middle of an Iron Age hill fort. So this is just the same photograph of the same site, and again of the location of the radiocarbon date. And above it is, for example, there's a lamp niche in the roof. This is not a candle niche to do with later mining. This is to do with burning a torch or some oil lamp. It's very, very different. It's extremely primitive type of lighting. And we believe this was sort of one of the foci of Iron Age working. But of course, we've only worked in the entrance series so far. So this is a photograph here is of a similar karstic infill mineralization at the nearby Llyn quarry, which is a photo courtesy of Roy Starkey. And it gives you an idea of the sort of mineralization which is no longer present, that would have been taken out by perhaps the Iron Age miners. Another thing I would like to draw your attention to is we also have dated from beneath some of the stalagmite sections, charcoal sealed beneath them, which have returned early medieval dates. And what's really interesting about this is that these early medieval dates match almost very closely the construction and use of the Offa's Dyke during the period of the Mercian kingdoms. Offa's Dyke is only 500 meters away from, so both these Iron Age and these early medieval dates make perfect sense according to its location. Iron Age copper smelting hearth has been discovered and excavated at Llanymynech within the hill fort and nearby at Domgay Lane at Four Crosses. So Llanymynech is a high zinc copper source, produces a regional signature in the late Bronze Age and Iron Age. And this is sort of really important. Again, this makes perfect sense because of the nature of the mineralization of these copper carbonates with a high percentage of zinc in it that we find at Llanymynech. Very briefly, I'm just going to mention the Roman sites of Delive and Craig-y-Moyn. Craig-y-Moyn being in the Barrowins and Delive being in the Plynlimmon area. At Pen Delive, this is a survey produced by Clwyd-Powys Archaeological Trust by Mark Walter and Richard Hankinson, but I've adapted it and I revisited one of these sites, these square hushing tanks, which are right adjacent to this Flavian period fortlet, Roman fortlet there at Penycrochben. So from the base of the exit, leat exit from one of these square tanks, we have a radiocarbon date, which is it's early medieval date. But when we bear in mind the sort of results they were getting from the Roman leats, excavating the Roman leats at Dolocothe, the Annal, and the Cothe leats, from the abandonment layers, the peat infill, they're getting peat layers. So basically, it's a terminus antiquem for an earlier use of the leat. So we don't know, but these tanks could be early medieval, but based on their shape and examples from elsewhere, they're very much like Roman hushing tanks. Finally, Craig-y-Moyn. So this is quite a stunning aerial picture here of this large open cast on at the Clwyd-Powys mine, working a stockwork of lead loads. Note all these small tanks fed by leat feeders along the edge, on the left-hand edge of this open cast, and also an earlier leat system. What's interesting here is this is almost a doppelganger for the sorts of things that we find at some of the large Roman open cast workings for gold in northwest Spain. Now, this is for lead, it's not for gold. But we know that they were fire setting. There's lots of evidence for fire setting on the breaking up the edge of the open cut. And they were using water rather like Pliny describes it being used in northwest Spain for removing broken up rock. So here the water, this hushing is being used to wash away the fractured rock. I did one small archaeological section through a late leat feeder to the rear of the open cast, which suggested there was also medieval working here. But I think the most interesting evidence from this is another peat core that I took with Tim Mayle, where we have both Roman and early medieval lead peaks within this radiocarbon dated peat core. So thank you. Just as conclusions, so we have 2, possibly 3 early Bronze Age mines identified in Powys within the Plynlimmon area. These were relatively small mines which probably only produced a few tons of copper over an extended period of time. Near the coast, beach cobbles were used as tools, whilst the other side of the mountain divide, that's into Powys, only poorer quality river pebbles, glacial cobbles and even quarried stone were used against fire-set rock and for crushing ore. Recent investigations at the supposedly Roman mine of Llanymynech have shown that this is partly natural cave, which was worked for copper during the Middle to Late Iron Age period, contemporary with the occupation of the hill fort. Again, no surprise here, but nice to prove. It may also be inactive during the period of use of Offa's Dyke, and I think we can show there was some activity in the mine. Whether it was just entry or whether they were mining, we don't know. Possible Roman hushing tanks have been identified at Pendilive. These tanks are more typical of the Roman period, although the abandonment infill that we have a date for is later. At Clwyd-Powys in the Berowins, the Leeton tank systems are much more complex and resemble some of the tank systems described by Pliny in Spain. There are no such dated features here, but the geochemical record from a nearby peat bog confirms both Roman and medieval activity. Mining, perhaps smelting, but certainly mining activity, which supports the contention that Clwyd-Powys was worked from the Roman period onwards. Thank you.